So now I'm going to show you a few of the most common things that can happen when exporting with FBX to Unreal for the first time, and of course, how to avoid these things in the future. So I have this Old West saloon model that I'd like to bring into my game level. For my Unreal game level, I've chosen to repurpose this slightly older 3DS model, which exhibits many of the classic issues that modelers go through. With the shaded textured model in view, you'll notice right away that we have some problems. And these are perfectly common of free models that many like to use for school courses, their own hobbyist learning, or even small indie projects. I wanted to give you a pretty thorough worst case scenario, so you can handle any FBX export situation in the future. These issues can also reflect many other situations, such as having created your model in a different 3D program. Or perhaps you're still relatively new to 3D modeling. So if we tried to bring this model into Unreal right now, we'd see the disconnect that there can sometimes be between the way a model appears in a modeling application such as Maya and a 3D game engine. We'll know that we've done things correctly when we've eliminated that disconnect. So let's see what can happen even with the correct FBX export settings. I think this trips many people up. So, click on your model so that it's highlighted in green, then from the File menu export selection. Under File Type select FBX. In the settings, we'll want to turn on smoothing groups and smooth mesh. Also check embed media so that our materials and textures are exported. Set units to millimeters and leave axis conversion at Y. Version FBX 2011. And now let's give our file a name. I called mine Saloon Original for UDK. By default, the FBX file will be exported to the same location as the Maya scene. We can change this by browsing to the desired location in this drop-down menu here. And to wrap up with this part of the process, press Export Selection. And we're ready to move over into the Unreal Development Kit. What we're going to do now is bring in the default version of the saloon that I showed you in Maya. Open the content browser, select Import from the bottom, and navigate to where you saved your FBX. Select the file and press Open. So, as we move along in our project, we have a building model from Maya that we'd like to bring over into the UDK. Now we're at the FBX import dialog, which is exactly the same regardless of whether you're importing a static or skeletal mesh. In the Unreal Editor, static items such as buildings are referred to as static meshes. And UDK will actually detect the correct type for each model that you're importing. You can see this under the general heading, Import Type. It should have static mesh automatically selected. Whereas if it would have detected a bone hierarchy, then it would have selected skeletal mesh. So for package name, select a new name or an existing package, optionally for sorting purposes, a group, and finally a name for your static mesh. Now this name will only be used if you have override full name checked, and the FBX only contains a single mesh. Otherwise it'll use the name found within the FBX file itself. If we've created multiple level of detail versions of our model in our modeling program, we'll want to select Import Mesh LODs. We'll be demonstrating this in a later chapter. If override tangents is selected, the normal and tangent data from the FBX file will be discarded. Under Material Options, if you've created a material for your model, then to save time you should of course select Import Materials. You should have also enabled Embed Media in your FBX export options. And the same is true for textures, although they'll also be imported if they're in the same folder as the FBX. If you have normal maps included in your texture import, selecting Invert Normal Maps will invert their values. If Create Groups Automatically is set to true, it'll create separate groups for materials and textures. Down in Static Mesh Options, the first option we see is Combine Meshes. Let's say that we created our building in multiple pieces, which may be a good idea if your model is very large. This is because for efficient and correct import, Unreal likes models to be under a certain size. If they aren't, it'll return an error and actually suggest that you break up the model into smaller pieces. So what this option does is let you recombine the parts into one larger model again. But maybe you'd want to provide yourself some more modular decorating options for your level, by being able to combine these parts in more unique and interesting ways as you go along. Selecting Combine Meshes obviously wouldn't allow you to do this, so in this case, it would be better to leave it unselected. Replace vertex colors basically allows you to use the importer to replace the vertex colors of an existing mesh with the ones from the FBX file. Now this is only really useful if you want to do complex material blending. Moving on, under explicit normals, if this is checked, the normals for the model will be taken from the FBX file, and if it's unchecked, they'll be calculated by Unreal. Depending on which version of UDK you're using, you may or may not see this explicit normals option, as it's been removed from the September 2011 version. Next, and here's an interesting sounding one, remove degenerates. This can improve the quality of imperfectly modeled meshes, and it does this by removing any hidden triangles with no surface area. So back to the model we're working on importing for this level. It's set to static mesh, and we can leave it there. We want materials and textures to be included, so we'll check both those, and we can also select create groups automatically. Finally, we want explicit normals, and we can let it remove degenerates. Now we can go ahead and hit OK, and Unreal will load the model. Now if you'll remember in the previous lesson, I mentioned that even if we get the settings perfect in FBX, there's still plenty of room for things to go awry, which is what I'm demonstrating here and what we'll be addressing in the very next lesson.